Hello everyone, welcome to the Grow Your Future podcast. I am your host, Zah Azmi, and I would like to introduce my good friend, Wally Lewis.
Wally Lewis.
Also known as Sam Eljaban.
What was he used to be called? Wally Lewis. He had a name, didn't he?
Can't remember, but for our listeners who
Wally
aren't
Lewis.
watching this on YouTube, Sam's wearing
The Mighty Maroons.
the Mighty Maroons.
I dislike them a lot, but I thought I'd support them today.
And why? Why, Sam?
Because we're going to talk about why we love Brisbane.
Yes. So last podcast, we talked about why we love Melbourne. And we thought, okay, we'll do one on Brisbane because these are the two markets we're really focusing on at the moment.
Are we going to do one called Why We Hate Sydney or no?
Yeah, only if you wear a Blues jersey. I think we should do one on why we love Sydney. Actually, that's a really good idea.
It could be, yeah.
Because there's a lot of things that we do love about Sydney, and we bash Sydney a lot, right? And a lot of our fellow Sydney listeners must think, "Wow, why do these guys even live here?"
We love living here. But there's some things we don't like about it.
Yeah, it is a tough city to live in. But in saying that, there are a lot of good, I guess, positive traits of Sydney that we love. But I think we'll do that in a separate podcast because we don't want to take the spotlight away from Queensland.
Brisbane, yes.
Yeah, so more specifically Brisbane, right? Southeast Queensland. Brisbane's it's a massive city.
I got a stat for you.
Tell me.
It's the third largest geographic area city in the world. Third largest in size.
I've heard it goes from, I probably should have done some research on this before the podcast, but I've heard it spans about 180 kilometres long or something like that.
The number I have, but it's squared, it said 1,100 kilometres squared.
Wow.
Like, I'm not a geographic dude, but it's massive.
So what's that, 10 by 10, something like that?
Something.
So yeah, wow.
So it's huge. So it's a big place. And another good thing I was reading about it as well is they're going to try and keep 40% of it as natural habitat. So not only it's massive, they're going to restrict, all the development there to keep it green.
Yeah, right.
Which is part of their planning, which is pretty cool.
Which is going to restrict supply even more.
So even though it's huge and people go, they can keep building, but no, part of their planning is they're going to restrict, and 40% is huge.
Like, that's probably the council's call because they just don't want to do any extra work in approving plans.
Extra work, but also the land value goes up, their rates go up. Man.
Yeah.
It's all a game.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that didn't even think of that.
Up.
Yeah. That's interesting.
It's good for business if
it's good for us investors.
Yes,
it's good for us investors because it restricts supply. And look, there's a lot more growth to occur. Let's just talk about a success story that just happened recently. A property that I built for $1 million. That's house and land in Brisbane, in a suburb called Fig Tree Pocket, which is about 8 kilometres from the city. This property. It was about 500 for the land and 500 for the build. Spec build, would use Metricon for this one. Extremely happy with the quality of the product. Location was awesome. Yep. This was completed in, I think, the end of 2020. Yep. And we just recently got a bank val at $1.9 million.
Wow.
So we know bank vals are usually quite conservative, so it's safe to say that the property would sell for $2 million plus. We had next door sell for, I think, for 2.2. So there's that sort of comparable sales there. So $1 million in 3 years.
Can't save that.
Wow, man. That it's got to be on a singular investment for us, the best investment we've ever done.
Is that the quickest and largest?
Yeah, if you think about how much margin was in it, and let's just go back to when we financed that property. It was 150 grand cash out of pocket. It was 100 grand for the deposit. It was 10%. We used $50,000 for LMI and stamp duty, and turned it into $1 million.
Times 6 or 7.
Crazy. And it can still be done. That's the exciting thing. And this is the reason why we love Brisbane. And if we go back to Sydney, for example, and we've got property holdings in Sydney, the margins are just not there. It's just, it's so hard to create a profit margin now. And I was talking to a guy last week about building duplexes out of, I think it was in Marylands or something like that.
Marylands, yeah.
Yeah, and he said the margins on it was like 50 grand.
Do they have bulletproof glass out there? That's why it's expensive to build.
Well, maybe, but that's probably what's squeezed the margin, right? The extra material required to build the house. But in all seriousness, because land values are so expensive and also construction prices are so expensive, the market is just not willing to pay for that finished product to give the developer a profit margin. Where we can do this in other markets like Brisbane, and you don't even need to be building a duplex. Like that property we were just talking about in Fig Tree Pocket was a big 5-bedroom, 2-story, 300 square metre home. It was a spec build, so we got it, at competitive rates. And I truly believe that the opportunity right now lies in the spec builds. Because the spec builds, for people that don't know what spec builds are like your Clarendon Homes, your volume builders.
Big guys,
yeah, a lot of these guys have gone bust in the last 2 years because of COVID and all of that sort of thing. But the ones that are still standing, I think they're still getting relatively competitive rates compared to if you were doing a custom build.
Because they got the size, right?
Yeah, they're
buying stuff.
It's prefabricated off-site. They bring it's not exactly a kit home, but it's a lot of the stuff is done off-site, and they're just putting it together on-site. So I think like if you're paying say $1,800 a square metre, in comparison to say $2,500, it's sometimes $3,000 a square metre for a custom build, depending on how hard you go. I think it's extremely good value for money. So we're still getting at the moment. $1,800, $1,900 a square metre for very good quality product. It's just about finding the right land, the right location, and all of that sort of thing. But what we love about Brisbane is that it's still in that affordable price point.
And going back to your Fig Tree Pocket example, just so people, like $1 million back then when you did it was still expensive, right? Like
it was.
Like you had to run the numbers and be confident.
It was a lot of money.
But it just shows you that even though it could be still, because we get clients going, 700's, it's a lot of money. Look what happened to your property. It's a lot of money to start with, but given time, it's going to grow.
Yeah, and
it's still affordable compared to Sydney as well.
Exactly. And I think people need to understand that, it takes a lot of horsepower in the beginning to invest in property. Like you've got to save a lot of money, you've got to show the servicing, you've got to prove yourself. But then once you have it, it takes a life of its own. So this property is only one of many that I have, right? But originally when I bought it, it was $1 million. It was projected to only rent for $800 a week, which at the time was a good return.
That's a 4.5% or something.
Now it rents for $1,350. You know what I mean? So a lot of people think, okay, all I want is capital growth, but if you buy in the right locations, you'll also get the rental growth as well. And rental growth usually only comes, or not only, but usually, generally speaking, comes from things like apartments, because apartments are in probably more convenient locations. You've got people sometimes with higher incomes in that area that are willing to pay that rent if the supply is restricted. So you generally get that rental growth through apartments. That's why we love apartments, right? But to see it in housing is unbelievable, and it's due to its low vacancy rates, the demographic that live in the area, the restriction on supply, all of those factors come into play. But we wanted to go through 10 reasons why we love Brisbane, right? So let's start on the first one.
All right, so Brisbane versus Sydney, the best weather. So between the two, you could arguably say Brisbane has a nicer sort of climate. It's a lot hotter.
So we're going to bash Sydney again. Yeah. Right, so we're doing
What's a comparison? So you have to.
Yeah,
you sort of.
You have to. We have to. It's like Queensland versus New South Wales, right?
Yeah.
So which one's better?
So you would say Brisbane. Brisbane, a good stat. It's sunny 250 days plus a year. So if you like sunshine, which usually sunshine and all that kind of thing, a bright day is good for your brain. Makes you feel good about yourself.
I was up there last week, and it's freezing here in Sydney. Yeah. Like today is exceptionally cold, right?
Yeah.
And I was up in Brisbane, we were filming some content, and I was in a t-shirt.
Yeah.
you know, and it was sun was shining. It was beautiful, right?
You felt good up there, right?
Yeah,
Like
I think it was like 22 degrees. Like it wasn't obviously overly hot, but it wasn't jumper or jacket weather. It was beautiful, man. At night got a little bit cool, but it's tolerable, you know. And I think, you know, people are really attracted to that. And
well, it's Australia. Everyone likes the heat, the sun.
Yeah,
you know
like
I mean?
it's.
The
I
beach
feel like
stuff.
we're becoming a little bit more like Melbourne now,
is,
Sydney, because
yeah.
it's gotten colder every year.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
so
yeah.
a lot of people are fleeing to the better weather. I think that's probably the main attraction. But like a lot of people, I think, what we like to compare our cities to, say, America, because a lot of people consume American content, right? So it's good to sort of compare to I guess we look at them as a bigger brother, America. And I will compare Brisbane to, say, Miami. Miami's sort of like a Gold Coast sort of style area, and then you've got LA, which I compare to Sydney. You know, LA has great weather as well in the summer, but then obviously it's cold in winter. But it's not just the weather, right? Like what's happening in I think it's the state of California in America, is that their property taxes are very high. They're starting to tax the really wealthy guys. There's a lot of trouble in that state, and a lot of people are migrating out. Very similar to what's happening here. Property prices are too high, cost of living pressures are too high, all of that sort of thing. And people are moving out, and they're moving up north, and they're moving interstate. You know, both of our sisters live there, right? And they live a great life in Brisbane. And the interstate migration levels have never been higher.
Yeah, and what are people really chasing when they're doing that is quality of life. When you look at why does someone move? If you look at immigrants coming to Australia, as an example, they're coming because they want a better quality of life. It's the same within Australia. If I can get a nicer... I'm dealing with a client right now. They have a business in Sydney. And they've got their home, no investments, they got their home. They've made all right money. I think they've got a net equity of about $1 million. And they're a young family. I think they're about mid to late 30s. And they've done all right. They bought early. They want to leave Sydney. They just had enough. It's a rat race. They're busy, blah, blah, blah. Because they can go up north to Queensland, buy something for $1 million, which is going to be very nice, in a nice spot, and they'll be debt free, and
have money in the bank,
and they can set up a business up there. But they can go square one, done, finished. They don't have that issue that 90% of people have in Australia about a big mortgage and stressing about that daily. So quality of life interstate in Brisbane, I see it with my sister. When she went up there, it was a few years ago, housing comparatively was still affordable compared to Sydney. They did well. They bought something relatively cheap compared to Sydney, and they've had a great life. Like it's just, they don't have the same big stresses people have down here about just shelter.
Well, it costs $1,300 to rent a two-bedroom unit here, in Sydney, and it's becoming very hard for people. And Sydney just doesn't offer the lifestyle that say Brisbane has. And
you're too busy working to pay.
I even look at my sister, right? And we help them get into a property, and they've made some really good money on that, and they're now investing in more with us. But we see their lifestyle, and they've got their weekends, and they've got the sunshine, and they don't stress over the same things as like what we do, and it's a lot of pressure here, And I've got a friend in Brisbane who they had a contact that were in Sydney. They sold a place for $8 million, right? This is very similar to your story, but just a little bit bigger numbers. They sold something for $8 million. They bought something in a suburb called Hamilton, which is like, a cracker suburb in Brisbane. One of the best suburbs in Brisbane, right? On the water for $4 million. Wow. They got $4 million in the bank. And they said that their house in Hamilton shits on their house in Sydney. And it's half the price.
Wow.
Right? Like, so a lot of people are sort of seeing that now. Like last week, we went to Fortitude Valley, and we stayed at this hotel called the Carlisle. And the Carlisle's been open for, I think, 2 years, 3 years or something like that. Developed by a couple of brothers who just transformed this area. And they've got some of the best restaurants there now. Like it literally is like the Double Bay of Brisbane. And this has been done purely from a hotel development. And the people that are drawn there, like you could tell that these were quality people that had money, affluence. Like we hired a G-Wagon, right? And it was in the valet part when I got it delivered. And I thought I was the man, right? Then this Lambo pulls up. Then this McLaren pulls up. And it's like, wow, there's wealth here. And what I'm really impressed with Brisbane is it's a really great place for people who are between the ages of say 25 and say 45.
Why?
Because it's in that growth phase.
Okay.
So you're surrounded by innovation, right? You're seeing new restaurants pop up. You're seeing new cafes pop up. You're seeing hotels like the Carlisle being developed. Like you've got all of this infrastructure that's getting pumped into this city, and you're seeing the change. There was a time where I hadn't been up to Brisbane for, I think it was almost a year, because when Cash was born, I stayed home a lot, right? I just didn't travel, as you would know. And then I was like, okay, I've now really got to get interstate again. Went to Brisbane and I was like, wow, the change. Like, it's massive. Like, you've got new restaurants. People are out.
Yeah.
It seems like they're more social.
It's a nice city there. Yeah.
It's beautiful, man.
For
beautiful.
people. I think where they've done it better than Sydney, just as a sort of general comment, when you go to Brisbane, it feels a lot more friendly for a person.
Oh yeah.
Like when my sister takes me to what's that, South Bank and the gardens.
Yeah.
The
It's beautiful there.
It's just for people.
They've got a man-made beach there.
Yeah, it's awesome, and it's huge space in the middle of the city just for people.
Yeah.
So it's like, man, it's awesome.
And I truly believe Brisbane is underpopulated right now, which means that there is room. Like, we sort of don't have room here. Like, I can feel it, right? When you go on the roads
Just
now,
the traffic, yeah.
Oh,
Traffic's a good indicator.
I live 5 k's away from my office.
How long does it take you?
Sometimes it takes me 45 minutes.
It's stupid.
If I go at the wrong time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's crazy the amount of people that are here, how dense it is, and there's so much more opportunity for growth and more people to come. And then, like, you know, obviously I have a lot of meetings in Brisbane, and you know, when you speak to people, they're very excited about their city. Like, you know, when you talk to people here in Sydney, they fucking hate it. Everybody hates it. Oh, I'm working too much, rent's too expensive, mortgages, business is not...
Takes me 2 hours to get home.
Yeah, like, it's always whinge, right? And I fall into that trap as well.
It's easy.
But when you sit with Brisbane people, they are just so excited about what's happening to that city. It's just beautiful. Like, and good things happen from that. You know, when you've got that great vibe, that great atmosphere, like innovations happening, restaurants are full. Like, you go to restaurants, we've been going to restaurants quite a bit around here, and sometimes we're the only one in the restaurant.
Yeah.
Like, we went to a restaurant the other day, I think it was actually Cash's birthday, right? And there was like 2 other people in the restaurant. And there was another restaurant we made a booking at. I won't mention them because I don't want to embarrass them. But we made a booking at this restaurant because we never tried it before. And it's a very, very well-known restaurant. Well, semi-high end, not one person in there.
Nothing.
And we're like, fuck, we don't want to go in there. Like, it's...
Be the only person.
Be the only person eating in the restaurant, right?
Awkward, yeah.
So, like, and it wasn't just them. It was like, it's been a common occurrence here in Sydney. So... people just can't afford it, right? But in Brisbane, like, restaurants are packed, you know, they're buzzing. And, you know, whenever you go to a restaurant, you sort of want it to be like that, right? Like, it's fun.
It's atmosphere.
Yeah.
It builds atmosphere. That's what Brisbane's doing. So they've developed, you know, a sort of vibe about it. Now people want to be there. There's a stat I found that they said net migration to Queensland itself is going up 50,000 a year.
Wow.
That's internal.
Wow.
So forget about external.
That's internal, like interstate migration.
Interstate migration. And another really good, this was this survey was given to people, and it said that 15% of Australians are contemplating a move to Brisbane or Queensland in the next 3 to 5 years. So that's 15% of all Australians. And what's that? That's 3 million.
You've considered it, Sam.
Oh, I keep buying houses there. I never get to use them, and I might move into one.
Yeah.
So, no, I think whenever I go and see my sister, like yourself, I've seen what's changing there. And whenever I go there, it may be because I'm on a holiday and I'm not in a work, like, day to day. That might add to it. But the actual city, I enjoy going there. It's just beautiful. They've they've thought about it, and there's money being spent, and like you said, there's opportunity. Here in Sydney, you do get, I guess, a bit down when you realise the things you want to do here are just so sometimes out of reach. Someone might want to do a townhouse, build something in Sydney, but there's no way you can do it if you're on sort of average income, where if you have average income up there, you can actually pursue these things. You can set up a restaurant.
And look, that's not going to last forever, Sam.
No, that's
right. And this is the thing, like people are...
Everyone's going there.
Yeah,
So
people
it's a
are
rush,
identifying that value now. And I truly believe it's probably going to have a good run for the next 10 years, which leads us into the next point of the Olympics being in 2032. Which is 10 years away, right? So it's not so much the Olympics. I don't even know anyone that really watches the Olympics anymore, but it's not so much the Olympics that draws people to the city, like it does for those 2 weeks that it's on, but it's the infrastructure that happens beforehand. All the building and all of the planning to accommodate this population surge, right? And also to accommodate these people from overseas. So it's also a status thing because they want to be put on the map. It's almost like the F1 having, the Melbourne having the F1. So they want to make sure that they put on a show. And, you know, governments spend unbelievable amounts of money to put on this show for the rest of the world. Which means that over the next 10 years, there's going to be a lot of projects that, you know, are going to be funded, not just by the government, but privately as well, to accommodate this special event.
Well, they see the economic activity. So they're seeing all the money being spent there, contracts going on, people moving there. So it's a place of growth, and people want to be a part of it. A good little stat I found, just to compare
You're
to
good
Sydney.
with your stats, aren't you?
Yeah, it's like, because it's property stuff, you know, all the
numbers.
I have to come up with stats because you've got all the stuff up in your head, man. But I just wanted to see what happened to Sydney. So Sydney, in the property market space, they did a study and they said property values increased 60% from the time they announced Sydney had the Olympics in 1993 to when it started in 2000.
Wow.
So in that 7-year period, Sydney, on
That
average,
is a fucking good stat,
went up
Sam.
60%.
Yeah, that's so good.
And so we're sort of at that time now, even though Brisbane's gone up quite a lot because of other reasons, it still hasn't really taken impact of that infrastructure, which is, I agree with you. The infrastructure is what really, it's the gold that comes from the Olympic Games. All that building and activity that creates a bigger city for people to live in will just provide, you know, more opportunity for people to live there.
And when did we get announced?
1993. So it's
For
after,
Sydney.
I think it's two Olympics before.
Okay.
They announced so they can prepare, like now.
So it was
1993 was announced. 7 years later.
We had to do a lot of work in that 7-year period to accommodate for that event, right? New stadiums were built, new train lines, all of that sort of stuff, which, you know, now, you know, like Homebush, for example, was nothing before. Right?
Abattoir or something.
Yeah, and now
Dumping
you've
ground.
got, you know, I think it's Wentworth Point and all of those places where everyone wants to live there now. Like it's actually, you know, it's housed a lot of people. There's shopping centres, all of that sort of thing, which is, it's really good to see progress. And that's the one thing that you don't see as much of in Sydney anymore, because it's sort of like, how much further can we progress? You know, land values are even for commercial developers aren't stacking up. So you don't see as much innovation. Here you just see more maintenance, right? Where in cities like Brisbane, that innovation and that progress that you see every, say, 6 months you go there, if you do happen to go there every 6 months, you'll see the change. And then you'll just see more people, and it's amazing. It's amazing.
It would have been similar, I reckon, as to what's happening now. Back then, Sydney would have announced they got the Olympics, and people would have saw the opportunity, I would say, in Australia. And if I didn't get the stats, but there probably would have been a net migration, massive blow up coming to here for the jobs.
Yeah.
Because there's infrastructure here, there's a lot of money to be made, all the engineers have to come here, do the work, all that kind of thing. There would have been a sort of explosion there of people coming here, which would have reflected that 60% increase in property value. So the same thing happening in Queensland. Just you got to jump in while you still can.
Beforehand, right? Well,
beforehand. Now, 7 years to run.
we're sort of at the bottom of the property market now, like after these interest rate rises for the last, it's been about a year now, yeah, right? Usually what happens when we hit the bottom, the first property market to take off, and there was actually an article in today's Australian Financial Review saying that Sydney is set to, I don't know, gain 10% or something, double digits over the next 12 months, which can happen because the stats are sort of pointing in that direction. Sydney usually takes off first, and then Melbourne follows, and then Brisbane. So the beauty of Brisbane is that you probably are buying at the lowest point right now. And people might look at, let's say, a house and land package for 800 grand and go, oh, it's still expensive. No, I just want something a bit cheaper. But what you got to realize is that is cheap.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like in 12, 24 months time, you're going to look back on that and go, fuck, it's cheap. Just like that $1 million property I did at Fig Tree Pocket, $1 million for that is fucking cheap, right? But at the time, I was like,
expensive.
Wow, that's a lot of money. Yeah. You know what I mean? But it's cheap for that. Now it's worth $2 million. So you've got to remember, prices aren't going to come back any more than they are. And if you can't afford Sydney, then Brisbane's your answer. And you've got a window, right? You've got a window. Like it's not going to shoot up straight away, but you know when it does, you'll be spewing that you missed the boat.
Yeah, so you have to jump in while it's still affordable. Because there'll be a point in time, if we're still doing this podcast, that will say we'll be bashing Brisbane because you can't do anything there.
Well, Brisbane will turn into Sydney, right? Like it could be in 20 years' time where it's unaffordable and look, there's nothing wrong, let's say with Sydney, there's nothing wrong with the city in terms of us like living here and enjoying it. It's just the fact that from an investment point of view, it doesn't make sense. Like we're not going to go and spend $2 million on a townhouse and rent it out for $1,000 a week. It doesn't stack up financially for us investors. And that's one thing where people get too emotionally attached to cities and stuff like that. It's not that it's whether you love the city or not. Like you might hate Brisbane. Like for me, I don't even think I could really live in Brisbane because it's just not me. But I can see how people would love it, right? So that's where you got to detach yourself emotionally and go, okay, where do I want to park my dollars? Highest and best use of my funds, right?
Yeah. So our thinking about Brisbane is very different to the homeowner. We're trying to get a return.
Well, you want to think like the government, right? And this leads us on to number 4. The government recognises that Brisbane has this growth potential, right? And they're allocating funds to this city, and they're doing it through the infrastructure projects.
Billions.
They're partnering with private developers. They're offering incentives because they're trying to push their funds plus more into that city. Why? Because they can see a payoff. So if you can sort of operate like the government does and goes, okay, well, where are they focusing? Like they're not focusing on regional towns. Like, yes, regional towns are getting some sort of funding, but they're not getting nowhere near the amount of funding these cities like Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne are getting. So we've got to remember, okay, where do we want to park our funds? We've got to act like a government. Where do we want to start building infrastructure, which is really our homes, right? Or these investments. And we follow them and we go, okay, highest and best use of my capital and also my servicing, which are the two things you have access to. Where do I want to put it? So for example, $1 million 2-3 years ago for me, where does ZAR want to put it? Fig Tree Pocket looks good, 7-8 Ks from the Brisbane CBD. I trust it because the macro factors, it all points into that direction it's going to grow.
Yeah, and you have to remember these governments and big institutions that are investing there, we're pretty smart, but they have teams of smart people. They know there's a return. They know there's a return on this. Every dollar spent, they're going to get back some way in shape or form back to the government.
Well, it's big dollars, Sam. It's big dollars. Like they're not going to commit. We're talking billions of dollars to something where they're just going to go, let's just roll the dice.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So, like it's very calculated, and they can't afford to fuck it up, right? So if they're putting billions into this city, then it should be okay for you to put in $1 million.
Yeah, exactly. You used to do it at a bit of a. I used to look at markets, when I was younger, just learning about property, and I used the idea that where they're opening a Macca's or a Bunnings, where there's those business bigger businesses are starting to put big, shop fronts and things. That was an indicator to
Coles,
me.
Woolies,
They know. They've already done the research.
Yeah.
They know that by putting millions of dollars in this area over time, because it's not instant.
Well, they need a return as well.
That's right. And they're smart people. Man.
They don't build shit for nothing,
exactly.
right? If you're going to build shit for nothing, you'd build orphan homes, and it really make a difference. But you wouldn't build a Woolies.
That's right.
Just for nothing.
It's for money.
Exactly. And that's why, you've got to follow the money, right? Where everybody else is going. And, a lot of people say, oh, what about these regional towns? What about Adelaide? What about Hobart?
Yeah.
And we get it. There is money going there, and you can probably pick up a good deal there and do quite well. But where is it going to be a sure thing? Like if someone said to me, someone did say to me the other day, actually, they're spending, I can't remember, on a new stadium or something in Hobart, and they're doing all of this. The government's putting a lot of money into it. But I'm like, okay, but where's the bulk of the funding going? I get, everybody gets funding, but where's the bulk of the funding going? It's Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, right? Now, unfortunately, in Melbourne, for example, you can't do houses anymore there. It's very, very difficult to do.
Costly, is it? Just the price points and things?
Just land values.
Land values.
It's too expensive. Yeah. I mean, we're sort of seeing it come back a little bit now, and we're exploring some options in the house and land market. We just don't want to be too far from the CBD. But in Brisbane, it's still quite affordable, right? Like you can still do something decent for $700-800 grand, and get a really good rental yield on it. And it's not really that much money when you compare it to, say, Sydney and Melbourne.
I think where people get a bit off track is investment 101. When you talk to financial planners and all that kind of stuff, you will have a certain amount of money in safe, not growth, but safe. So they call it blue chip stocks and managed funds. That, it's the Telstras. There's big Vanguard funds that they've been around a long time. They're a sure thing. They know what they're doing. They make money. You get a clip of the money. So I think where people are going wrong is they're looking at, say, Tasmania and these regional areas like a bit of a lotto ticket or like a crypto. They're like, oh, well, I can crack it there and just retire off one property when it's not really about that. And you run a big risk of losing a lot more there.
And I think what attracts these investors to these regional towns or these smaller cities is that they've got a great yield.
Yeah.
So, usually when you see a 6-7% yield, you wouldn't see that in, a blue chip area. You would see it more in a sort of regional area or a smaller city. And people go, oh, wow, it's positively geared and all of that sort of thing. But there's a reason why that yield is high. Is because no one really wants to buy.
They don't want to live, own property there. That's right.
That's right. Yeah. So and then they might have an extra $200 a week in income, but they've missed out on the hundreds of thousands of dollars of growth they could have made through capital appreciation in a blue chip suburb, right? Yeah. So what we need to remember is, when you buy properties in, say, Brisbane, even Sydney and Melbourne, the yields are relatively quite low. So our investments we're getting in Melbourne and in Brisbane, for example, they're only maybe 4.5%. Yeah. But what we've got to remember, those yields will catch up because not only the capital growth will go, but the rental growth as well, because you've got more money in that city. So there's more people with money in Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane than any other city in Australia. So you're kicking ass if you're in those three markets. And that's why we just say to people, just focus on those markets. And if you want to buy 10 properties, buy 4 in Brisbane, 4 in Melbourne, and maybe 2 in New South Wales, right? That's all you need to focus on.
Yeah. I think that, they get a bit of the wrong message, especially people growing. People that are starting out or midway through their journey with a few assets, it's really the capital growth you're in property for. I try to explain to my clients a lot. Some clients come to me for tax depreciation. They want to reduce their tax, but I'm like, that's not why you should invest. It's to increase your capital. You have 50 grand, you want to make it 100 or 200.
You need the growth mindset.
So they go, okay, well, so people are chasing maybe a tax deduction for property, which isn't the right thing, or they're chasing a yield, which isn't the right thing, because really you're not going to retire from an extra 10 grand a year from that one property. You want that capital to double, triple, over time. So depending where you are at, really on your path, if you're further down the track and you've got heaps and you want income, then that's fine. But if you're growing, really, yield should just be there to hold the asset. If it's any more than that, generally you have to ask yourself, why aren't people buying there? Which is what you said about the high yield. So I think people sometimes forget that.
Yeah. And look, our fundamentals, it's all about the location, right? Like that's the number one. And location is what drives rental growth, drives capital growth, and ultimately is going to give you what you need out of property investment. And again, I think people get a little too emotionally attached because they go, oh, but I went to Adelaide. Yeah. I went to Darwin or whatever it is, and I saw it. And I can see that there's good tenants there and there's a great property management firm and they talk themselves into
Well, they like the area.
Yeah.
But it's like, are you going to live there?
Yeah, exactly.
It's for someone else to rent, not
exactly.
you.
And you've got to go where the mass population go. And it's sort of works with, I guess, any product you buy. Like, for example, a car. The cars that depreciate the least are the ones that people want the most, right? So it's sort of the same thing with property. The ones that grow the most are the ones that people want the most. So if you can focus on that market that everybody wants that property, don't worry about if it's too expensive because it's not going to be expensive in 12 months' time. And that's what people need to understand, quality over that yield, right? Number 5. Housing shortage. We're hearing it all the time.
It's
right?
not changing.
It's not changing, but this is everywhere, right? But it's extremely low in terms of how undersupplied it is in terms of I guess it's also apartments as well, not just houses, right? Where I could think in 16, 17 there was an oversupply of units. Now that's all turned around. Hard to get a rental. 50 applications on one listing. They're bidding. They're trying to put in new laws for these price increases on rents and stuff like that. But it's just the market, right? Like it just tells us investors that, hey, if we buy something, it's going to rent really well because there's no stock on the market and it's probably going to grow in value.
And that's not going away anytime soon. So that housing shortage that's occurring now, it's going to continue going because I don't know what the stats are on builds and stuff, but it's declined, right?
Well, people can't afford it.
They can't afford it.
Right? Because construction prices are expensive, so or relatively expensive compared to, say, 2-3 years ago. So, people have stopped building. And you can see the planning approvals have now fallen off a cliff. They're not there anymore. So there's no new stock coming to market. All of these migrants that are coming from overseas and interstate migration as well. There's just not, the thirst is too much the demand is outstripping that supply.
And that's simple economics and just some stats I found as well. There's been the stat man today. 55% of searches from New South Wales and Victoria on realestate.com are going for rentals in Queensland, apparently. That's from realestate.com, some stats. And they said also that international searches are up 34% compared to pre-pandemic. So whatever that level was, it's up 34%. So there's a lot of competition from us, let alone Brisbane people. They just want to fucking buy a house. You get all these other people wanting to buy their houses.
And they're getting priced out. Like the locals up there, unfortunately, are getting priced out. And it's like, I've never seen Brisbane like this in my life. But it's got the lifestyle to match it, right? It's not like,
it's not all talk, eh?
Yeah, no.
When you go there, it's like, wow.
You go to the restaurants in the Carlisle Hotel, for example. We've got one of our favourite restaurants called SK. It's a steak place, right? It would have to be on par with Rockpool here in Sydney. It is unbelievably good. Unbelievably good. You talk to anyone in Brisbane that's been at SK and they're like, rave on about it. It has to be one of the best restaurants that I've been to in Australia. And that's just one, right? There's many of them and then new ones are just opening and opening and opening. And again, these restaurants are like the Woolies. They don't open, especially dinner for two at SK will cost you $500, right? These restaurants don't open for that demographic if there's no money in that city. Is a restaurant like that in Darwin? Probably not. No. Right? Nothing against Darwin, but it's just that we are trying to invest where's the money going, right? So like you definitely see that gap between how much housing is costing, the type of people that are there. You know, this goes back to, let's say, Fig Tree Pocket, which is the one that I built in. You know, the weekly family incomes of that area is like $4,000 a week, right? It's probably the same as what Bellevue Hill is, you know what I mean? But the property prices are 20-30% of Bellevue Hill. But the same people live in those locations. So what's going to happen to all of that excess cash? It's going to go into that economy. It's going to push up prices of rents because people are going to have more money to spend. It's going to push up property prices because people are going to be at auctions going, yeah, I'll spend an extra $500,000 because I've got it in the bank. I don't even need to get a mortgage, right? So that's what pushes up prices. Where, you know, these lifestyle suburbs like, let's call it Hobart, does it have the horsepower to be able to be in that position? I don't know. It's a bit of a gamble.
Do you think it's a bit of like a city going through a gentrification?
100%.
Sort of thing?
Like Brisbane's sat flat for about 18 years, right? And now it's
like an old stale town in a city suburb.
It's going to have this growth for the next 10 years.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's really, really exciting. Number 6, house and land is still affordable. We've already touched on this. We've gone through the pricing and all of that sort of thing. We see that there's extreme value in Brisbane right now because you can get 400 square meters, you know, a 200 square meter home on it, 4 bedroom, 2 bathroom, 2 car garage, brand new, in a great location. It could be close to the water, maybe half an hour from the city. Like, it's just amazing value. Like, where can you do that in Sydney? You just can't, right?
No, exactly.
So super affordable. I want to go to the number 7, which is New World City. So New World City means that you've got 2 world cities here in Australia, Melbourne and Sydney. We call them international cities. Brisbane is preparing itself to become an international city. So it is now becoming an international destination for people from overseas. And they're coming to Brisbane and only Brisbane, which means that like a lot of business is going to get driven there.
So it's working, like all this marketing, even the Olympics is helping the status.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and you can tell. Like, for our listeners, like, if you haven't been to Brisbane in the last 6 to 12 months, get up there.
I was looking into it and I was just trying to see what's pulling people there. And apparently there's a big medicine and biotech industry.
Oh, wow.
And that would stem from the unis. So students going there, you know, and that's a very lucrative type of industry.
Melbourne used to hold that title, right? And they probably still do. But Melbourne is becoming quite expensive as well. So, like, it's just
cold.
behind Sydney.
And it's cold.
And it's freezing, right? So, these international students also, even though a lot of them have money, but they still want value for money. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like these sort of rich agents that come here, they might have a specific allowance that they're allowed. Why spend, you know, $1,500 a week on rent when you can maybe spend, I don't know, $800, right? And have that $700 spare to go to SK restaurant to get a steak, right? You know what I mean? Like, you can live a lifestyle off that. And this is the reason why these restaurants are full. The cafes are full and people are out and about because they've got that disposable income left over.
I think the state itself, it knows to push a lot of money and take advantage of this Olympics sort of marketing campaign, because
very well timed for them.
It's like going to snowball into many other positives for the city.
Very well timed. Let's keep moving. Number 8, rental yields. So rental yields in Brisbane are probably the best out of, or they are the best out of Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane.
Yep.
You know, it's not uncommon for us to get a 5.5% yield on something that we complete for our clients, and that's an amazing yield. If they've got a 20% deposit in there, even at today's interest rates, they're positively geared, right? And that is very difficult to do anywhere else. And we're doing that on house and land, you know, where house and land is usually a low yielding asset, right? So that tells us that there's extreme amounts of value there. It's super affordable, and there's only one way the price can go.
That's right. But again, there's markets within markets, and just be careful. And again, touching on the yield sort of stuff, don't go too hard on the yield. as we said before. It should be enough, like 5%. 5% is usually a good indicator.
So when we chat about yields, it's
Yeah.
more so comparing it to Sydney and Melbourne,
Yeah.
right? So we're not saying go out and buy something that's an 8-9% yield, because that's
Correct.
going to be a shit box.
That's
It's
right.
not going to be good.
Yep.
We're just saying comparatively to Sydney and Melbourne, the yields are generally 1 to 1.5% stronger, which helps out with cash flow, especially in this high interest rate environment.
Helps you hold the property, and the properties are quality. So the higher the yield, if it goes above that, you're generally in a not so good location, and a not so good location takes longer to grow. So if you can sit around the 5%, you're doing all right.
Beautiful. Number 9, international migration. Predominantly from India and China,
Yep.
and all of the other Asian countries as well, of course. They've just recently opened the biggest Asian grocer in Australia.
Really?
In, I think it's Sunnybank
Uh-huh.
or Callumvale, one of those.
Biggest
Yeah,
grocery store.
yeah, the biggest Asian grocer. So it's like a Coles, right?
And again, what does Coles do before they set something up? They
Well,
know what's coming.
They know what's coming,
They're
right?
prepared for
And we have to understand is these big Asian brands, they've done their research as well.
Mm-hmm.
Where are people going, right? So that just goes to show that there's international migration going to that southern end of Brisbane, which will only push up prices.
Another thing just on international migration, just not only people, capital, I looked it up as well. So yes, the students are coming, but also I looked up Foreign Investment Review Board. So accountants deal with that sometimes if you have a foreign foreign person trying to buy in Australia, they have to go through different processes. So some stats from there, they were saying the 3 months or the quarter to December 2022, from China, Chinese capital invested in $600 million of family homes in Brisbane.
Wow.
So
Wow.
it's or that could be Australia, sorry. Or no, it would be Queensland. So in Queensland, there's a lot of money coming from overseas, and they said it's increased already for the March quarter by 127%. So not only the people, the money from overseas, as we know, is coming, but it's coming very fast.
Yeah, and I think if you don't get in the next, say, 2 to 5 years, I think you'll potentially be priced out. You'll be stuck buying an apartment in Brisbane, if that's the market you're still wanting to get into. So our advice is, try and get in as soon as you can, because it's actually still hard to get registered land, and
Because all this money's coming in.
Yeah,
It's
the
buying
demand is
everything.
through the roof. But we can still pick up that growth while things are a little bit cool at the moment. Our last point here is the same as what we did when we did our Melbourne one, and it supports our fundamentals. Our fundamentals are location, builder, developer, and there's a lot of good builders and developers up there at the moment. Supply and demand, we've just spoken about that, being low supply, high demand. Right stage of the cycle, because it's got, all the fundamentals there that tell us that it's going to grow, it's affordable. The rental yields are there. They're very, very strong still, and it gives us tax breaks if we're buying or building something brand new. So, look, we heavily endorse Brisbane. We're super excited about the city. We'll be involved with this market for, I guess, the next good solid 5 years. Really trying to push our audience and clientele into making the decision to get in while it's quite affordable and pick up that growth, right? So so if you guys have been thinking about it, please reach out to us, because it's a market we're really, really pumped by.
And there's still opportunities.
Yeah.
There still are opportunities.
Yeah, there's still opportunities, but they're few and far between.
You need to know what to do.
Yeah. So there you have it, guys. Brisbane.
We love it.
We love it. We love it, because there's a lot of money to be made there.
That's right.
Thank you, Wally Lewis, for your input today. It was very exciting to have you on again. And reach out if you want more information on Brisbane. We'll catch you next time on this podcast. Peace.